Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential because when you keep growing, we all get stronger. And we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
You're listening to the NASM-CPT Podcast with Richey, winner of the Share Care Emmy Award for Social Storytelling and the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Hey, y'all, and welcome to the NASM-CPT Podcast. My name is Richey, and today we're continuing with our dynamic postural assessment when we do the overhead squat assessment. Today's going to have a look at excessive forward lean. So when somebody's squatting and you see an excessive forward lean, if it is due to tight muscles, if it is due to mobility or flexibility or strength issues, then that's what we're going to be talking about. Now, if somebody just has really long femurs, and we see that in some cases where people just have long femurs. Now, that is femur to tib ratio, right? So, or a longer torso. We can have a longer torso, shorter femurs. That overhead squat assessment looks amazing. But if they have really long femurs, they're going to lean forward no matter what. So you can probably foam roll, you can stretch all you want. You may not be able to address anything just because of the length of their femurs. There's a mechanical not disadvantage. It's just a positioning that causes them to lean forward because of the femur to tibia length ratio. That's not what we're talking about today. Today, what we're talking about is what if we have a ratio that allows us to have that tibia torso angle. So when I squat down, my tibia shifts forward 20 degrees, my torso shifts forward 20 degrees, and I look like a pair of window wipers. They're lined up very nice. You have a nice little zigzag position. That's a great looking squat. Fantastic. You should have that if you're one of the people who should be in that position when they squat and you got an excessive forward lean. What are the reasons? I'm going to tell you first and foremost, based on the chart on page 811. This is the appendix in your CPT-7 textbook. It's a little bit different. It's not as much depth as the corrective exercise textbook, but let's go into it. When you see the excessive forward lean in the trunk, there are two things that are addressed in this particular situation. One is an excessive forward lean, but the other is a bend at the spine. So less of a forward lean and more of a forward flexion of the spine. And you'll see which ones and how they're differentiated here. So if you look at the overactive muscles, again, page 811, there is the static assessments, the dynamic postural assessments. Look from the lateral view. So that's the column that says lateral view, and you'll see LPHC. LPHC stands for lumbopelvic hip complex. And the first one there, the one on top, says excessive forward lean. Keep going over to the overactive muscles. It's going to give you a couple of muscles we need to address. First is going to be the soleus and gastrocnemius, commonly together known as the calves. So the calf muscles, they both are plantar flexors, and they also, when they're tight, they limit dorsiflexion. Now, when you squat, you need dorsiflexion. Otherwise, you're just doing deadlifts. You talk about an excessive forward lean, you're just doing deadlifts instead of squats. Some people put bars on their backs and they do deadlifts with the full intent of doing squats. They just basically look like they're doing good mornings. It's not a wrong exercise. You just got to differentiate between what a squat is and what a deadlift is. And in this particular example, a deadlift, your shin doesn't need to translate forward at all. You don't need to do any dorsiflexion. This is tibia on foot dorsiflexion, as opposed to open chain, where we lift our leg up and we pull our foot up, dorsy up. We pull it up towards the shin. Well, this one, the foot is planted, the shin goes down, the front of the shin goes towards the top of the foot. we've got dorsiflexion that's supposed to take place. But if my calves are really tight, then not a lot of good dorsiflexion can take place. And if that's the case, instead of my shin moving forward, my torso is just going to move forward. Also, this is why you have to cue this too. You can't just see somebody doing squats and say, all right, well, their calves are tight and their hip flexors are tight, which is the next one on the list. Maybe there's some other muscles that are tight because every time they squat, they just do an excessive forward lean. Well, that's not necessarily true either. It doesn't bring us any more information if, for instance, it could just be a cueing issue. It could be cueing. And what I don't like is that people spend a lot of time and effort saying, oh, I'm really into corrective exercise. I just did this course and I'm doing these sections and I'm moving on to the corrective exercise specialist. Everything is corrective exercise. It's not. Everything's not corrective exercise. I think cueing is a big part of it. Now, I don't cue the overhead squat assessment when I just have them do it, but after I have them do it and I make my notes, and then I just say, hey, when you squat, your knees knock together, try not to let them knock. Or if you squat, you got this excessive forward lean, try not to let them go forward. So here's the sample that I give when I work with people with a squat and they have an excessive forward lean. I will ask them, did you ever hear somebody tell you don't let your knees go over your toes when you squat? And if they say yes, then I will say, that may be why you have an excessive forward lean. Your knees can go forward in front of your toes as long as you keep your heels on the ground. Now, if their knees go forward and their heels come off the ground, then they're not getting range of motion from dorsiflexion. They are just shifting their weight forward onto the ball of their foot and their heels coming up. But if I say keep your heels on the floor, let your knees go as far over your toes as you want, as long as you are keeping your heels flat on the floor. And I also don't cue put your weight in your heels. It's another cue that I hear a lot with that I don't do and I don't care for. It's not wrong, just like don't let your knees go over your toes isn't wrong depending on what it is you're trying to cue. But what happens is that when we make a statement like that, it turns into dogma. And then what probably happened where that became so popular is that it's sort of being used in group fitness studios. And then it just became like a dogma. It became a law. And then all of a sudden, everybody's doing deadlifts. They look like they're bowing instead of squatting. And I think group exercise teachers like that because they like 30, 40, 50 people bowing to them when they squat. I just say that because I liked it when I was teaching group X. But it's not a squat. Deadlifts are not squats. So we're going to address it by saying your knees can go in front of your toes. They can go forward. Keep your heels flat on the ground. I generally will cue share the weight between the ball of the foot and the heel of the foot. There should be as much weight in the front of the foot as there is in the back of the foot. If the knees go forward past the toes, it's fine. In fact, it needs to in order for you to have a good looking squat. So go ahead and let those knees go forward. Keep the heels on the, and then cue it. See if that helps. If not, then they may have tight calves. And that's why in the overactive muscles, you'll see soleus gastrocnemius. So what do? Can address that. But you also look at hip flexors. When there's an excessive forward lean, really that's a lot of hip flexion. I'd say majority of the times it's not the hip flexors that are making that happen. Majority of the time it's lack of dorsiflexion, whether that is because their idea of what a squat should look like, which you address. It's probably not the hip flexors, but it can be. So hip flexors, excessive forward lean, then that might be part of the problem as well. You can imagine a lot of flexion with the torso goes forward could be the hip flexors. It's possible. And then you see rectus abdominis and external obliques. Those are less about excessive forward lean, and that's more about spinal flexion, excessive flexion in the spine. Somebody goes into a squat and they actually flex their spine forward. Well, if that's the case, then maybe those are short, tight, overactive muscles, but I'm gonna put my focus more on what the underactive muscles are. So let's move to the underactive muscles there in that chart. If I go into an excessive forward lean, it could be because my hamstrings are not strong enough to keep me upright. It could be my gluteus maximus, which is the next one there, maybe it's not strong enough. I go into forward flexion, and those muscles are not strong, especially in those end range positions to keep my torso upright. It could be my lumbar extensors because I have spinal flexion. So when I go into a squat, I flex my spine. I need to maintain extension. So my lumbar extensors may be the ones that just aren't strong enough to keep me in that neutral spine position. And those would be the examples of muscles that we could work. So what do I do with the short type overactive muscles if I can identify which ones specifically? Maybe I foam roll them and I stretch them. So if I go through some foam rolling and stretching, some of the muscles here you can't foam roll. You can't get a foam roller into most of your, well, I would say your major hip flexors would probably get most of them, but not all of them, especially not the deep ones like the iliacus and the psoas major. I'd also say don't foam roll your abs. Don't foam your external obliques. I don't think we need to be foam rolling those, but you can stretch them. So then you can go into your static stretching of those muscles. Then do some activations. Activate, try to strengthen your hamstrings and your glutes. Well, how do I do that? Go through a bridge series, which I think are really great. I want to focus more on my glutes, but sometimes I'll go into a glute bridge, focusing on my gluteus maximus. And then I'll just move my feet farther away from my butt, or I'll have them put their feet onto, let's say a bench in the gym, and they're lying down on a mat on the floor. And then they do a hamstring bridge with their feet on top of a bench. And that's going to focus more on the hamstring. So I do glute bridge, I do a hamstring bridge, and then I'll have them do a glute bridge again. So focus on the glutes, focus on the hamstrings, focus on the glutes again, but both can work in a glute bridge. Then that's a great exercise. The lumbar extensor exercises, the lumbar extensors also can work in the bridge position, but can they maintain isometric hold in that particular position? Then maybe throw a band over them, maybe put a little bit of weight over their hips and see if they can bridge against that, maintaining neutral spine, doing a hip extension with glutes and hamstrings working. Those are great exercises. Once you do that, stand back up. Let's look at your overhead squat, see if it looks any different. I would venture to say that it probably looks a little bit different, probably looks a little bit better, unless you have these really long femurs. And in that case, none of this stuff's going to work. All right. With that being said, I hope you found it helpful to do this review. We're going to keep doing for a couple of weeks. We're just going to pick one of these movement impairments as listed here in the textbook on page 811 in your CPT 7. We're just going to go through it, not necessarily to help you memorize it, but to help you understand it. So you can memorize this stuff and answer it on the test, but you may not know why. And if you don't know why, then you may not apply. So we give you the why so that you're more likely to apply that when you go and work with your clients. All right. I hope you found this helpful. You got questions for me about any of this or what you'd like to hear me talk about in the future, hit me up. You can DM me on Instagram or Threads, or you can email me, rick.richey@nasm. Oh, my Instagram is dr.rickrichey, or you can email me at rick.richey@nasm.org. Thanks for listening. Y'all keep inspiring people to fitness. This has been the NASM CPT Podcast.